By January 1945, London had endured 5 years of bombardment, only to face its most insidious threat yet. V-2 rockets striking without warning, faster than sound itself. Anti-aircraft defenses stood useless. Radar systems arrived seconds too late. Citizens died hearing nothing before obliteration. Then Arthur Bennett, a 43-year-old milkman from Stepney, proposed something the War Office dismissed as Barmy, a network of angled mirrors positioned across rooftops. What happened next defied every assumption about modern warfare. 4:47 a.m., 12th of January 1945, Stepney, East London. Temperature -2°C. Arthur Bennett pushed his milk cart through streets still smoking from the previous night's V-2 strike. Brick dust hung in frozen air. The crater on Commercial Road had swallowed an entire tenement. 17 families gone in the time it took to exhale. No siren, no warning, just the supersonic scream arriving after death itself. The V-2 campaign had transformed metropolitan defense into a mathematical nightmare that contradicted every principle of civil protection developed since 1940. Traditional air raid warnings depended on detection, tracking, and alert dissemination. The V-2 traveled at 3,580 miles per hour, 5 times the speed of sound, falling from the stratosphere in under 5 minutes from launch. By the time radar installations in Kent registered the trajectory, the rocket had already impacted. Londoners heard the explosion first, then the approaching scream as sound caught up with destruction. A perverse reversal that shattered the psychological framework of survivable bombardment. Statistics quantified the horror with brutal precision. Since September 1944, 517 V-2 rockets had struck Greater London. 2,154 civilians killed, 6,523 seriously injured, 23,000 homes destroyed. Unlike the Blitz, where shelters offered tangible protection and searchlights provided psychological comfort, the V-2 rendered civil defense infrastructure obsolete. You could not hear what killed you. You could not hide from what arrived faster than warning systems could transmit. The rocket created a new category of helplessness, death by mathematics, where velocity exceeded human response capacity. Arthur Bennett had delivered milk through the Blitz, maintaining his route whilst incendiaries fell like metal rain. He had dug survivors from rubble with bare hands, learned to navigate by craters instead of street signs, memorized which families had evacuated and which stubbornly remained. But the V-2 violated the unspoken contract between bombardment and resilience. During the Blitz, Londoners could hear bombers approaching, take shelter, feel they were actively surviving. The V-2 offered no such dignity. It simply erased you from existence before your nervous system could register threat. On the morning of 12th of January, pushing his cart past the Commercial Road crater, Arthur stopped. Sunlight caught the shattered window of a bombed-out chemist's shop, reflecting off a twisted display mirror at a precise angle that illuminated the far end of the street. For 17 seconds, Arthur stared at that reflection, watching how the angled glass captured light from a source he could not directly see, projecting it across impossible distances. The thought arrived complete, fully formed, mathematically inescapable. Light traveled faster than rockets, significantly faster. If a network of mirrors could be positioned across London's rooftops at calculated angles, and if observers monitored those mirrors continuously, they would see reflected sunlight glinting off the V-2's metallic fuselage during its descent. Seconds before impact, yes, but seconds were sufficient for a final warning, for a last scramble to interior rooms, for that desperate chance at survival that the current system denied. Arthur understood immediately that every professional would dismiss him. He was a milkman with elementary school education, proposing optical solutions to ballistic problems that had stumped the finest scientific minds at the Air Ministry. The War Office employed physicists from Cambridge and Oxford. The Royal Observer Corps operated sophisticated tracking networks. Anti-Aircraft Command had access to cutting-edge radar technology. Why would they listen to a civilian with milk bottles and a lunatic theory about mirrors? But Arthur had something the experts lacked: intimate knowledge of East London's rooftop geography from 5 years of dawn deliveries. He knew which buildings offered unobstructed sightlines across the Thames estuary, which chimneys provided stable mounting points, which angles would capture sunlight during morning hours when V-2 launches from occupied Holland typically occurred. He knew the families living in those buildings, knew who could be trusted to keep watch, knew the network of civil defense volunteers, desperate for any tool that offered even marginal protection. That evening, Arthur visited St. Dunstan's Church on Stepney Way, where the Reverend Thomas Caldwell coordinated the local ARP network. Caldwell was 58, a Great War veteran who had lost his left arm at Passchendaele and his faith in military hierarchy along with it. He listened to Arthur's proposal with skepticism that gradually transformed into reluctant fascination. "You're suggesting we mount mirrors on rooftops and stare at them all day, hoping to catch sunlight reflecting off rockets we can't hear coming?" Caldwell's tone mixed incredulity with something approaching desperate hope. "Not hoping, Reverend. Calculating. The V-2 is 46 feet long, made of steel and aluminum. During descent, it catches sunlight like a falling sword. If we position mirrors at 30-degree angles facing southeast toward the launch sites, we create an optical early warning network. Seconds, yes, but seconds mean lives." Caldwell studied Arthur for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The War Office will call you mad. They already think we're mad for staying in London. Might as well be usefully mad." By 18th of January, Arthur had recruited 14 volunteers: dock workers, shopkeepers, elderly ARP wardens, housewives whose husbands served overseas, people who had survived the Blitz through stubborn ingenuity, who understood that official channels moved slower than German rockets, who were willing to try anything that offered agency against helplessness. They scavenged mirrors from bombed buildings, chemist shops, ladies' dressing tables. Arthur calculated angles using string, protractors borrowed from local schools, and trigonometry remembered from youth. The first mirror went up on the roof of Bennett's Dairy, Stepney Green, on 19th of January. The second followed on the roof of the Crown and Anchor pub, then St. Dunstan's Church Tower, then the roof of Wickham's department store. By 23rd of January, 17 mirrors formed a network across 3 square miles of East London, each positioned to capture sunlight from the southeast and reflect it toward designated observation posts. The War Office, when finally notified through official ARP channels, responded with predictable condescension. A tersely worded memorandum dated 24th of January dismissed the mirror system as well-intentioned but scientifically unsound civil initiative lacking understanding of ballistic mechanics and detection physics. The regional ARP coordinator, a bureaucrat named Pemberton, who had spent the war shuffling papers in Whitehall, threatened to dismantle the network as unauthorized modification of civil defense infrastructure. Arthur ignored him. The volunteers ignored him. By dawn on 25th of January, the network was operational, with observers positioned at each mirror from 5 a.m. until noon, scanning the sky through the reflected images for the telltale flash of descending metal. The waiting began. Hours of staring at angled glass, watching clouds and birds, and the occasional RAF patrol. Skepticism grew among volunteers. Perhaps the War Office was right. Perhaps this was Barmy. Perhaps a milkman had no business challenging systems designed by Britain's finest scientific minds. Then, at 7:34 a.m. on 26th of January, Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, watching the mirror atop St. Dunstan's, saw something that made her blood freeze, a brilliant flash in the reflected sky, moving impossibly fast, descending at a steep angle toward Bethnal Green. She grabbed the bell rope and rang the warning with desperate strength. The clanging echoed across Stepney. Residents who had learned to trust Dorothy's reliability during 4 years of air raids immediately dove for interior rooms, pressed themselves against load-bearing walls, covered children with their bodies. 17 seconds later, the V-2 struck Bethnal Green. The explosion shattered windows across 3 streets, but not one person died in the impact zone. Every resident had reached minimal cover. The impossible had become real. A Milkman's Barmy mirror system had spotted what Britain's entire defense network could not. The age of improvised optical warfare had begun. The success on 26th January created immediate complications that threatened to overwhelm the fragile volunteer network before it could prove systematic reliability. Within hours, word spread through East London's tightly interconnected community. Residents demanded mirror installations in their neighbourhoods. ARP coordinators who had initially dismissed Arthur's system now pleaded for expansion. The Reverend Caldwell's church became an impromptu operations centre, with Arthur sketching mirror positions on salvaged maps whilst volunteers queued outside seeking assignments. But operational expansion confronted brutal resource constraints. Suitable mirrors required specific dimensions, minimum 18 inches square for adequate reflection, maximum weight for roof-mounting safety, sufficient quality to maintain clear images at distance. Arthur's volunteers scavenged bombed buildings at dawn, competing with salvage crews for any reflective glass not shattered beyond use. A dressing table mirror from a collapsed terrace became strategic asset. A chemist's display case transformed into early warning infrastructure. The physical environment imposed unforgiving limitations. January 1945 was bitter, with temperatures dropping below freezing most nights. Ice formed on mirror surfaces, distorting reflections. Volunteers worked on exposed rooftops in penetrating cold, securing mirrors to chimney stacks with whatever materials could be found. Rope salvaged from dockyards, wire stripped from damaged electrical systems, brackets fabricated in backyard workshops using scrap metal. Mrs. Fletcher nearly fell from St. Dunstan's Tower when ice made the ladder treacherous. Tom Wickham, a 62-year-old dock worker, suffered frostbite in his left hand after a 4-hour observation shift. The human cost of sustained vigilance became apparent within 72 hours. Observation required absolute concentration, staring at reflected sky for hours, watching for a flash that might last only seconds, knowing that distraction meant death for neighbours. Volunteers maintained shifts from dawn until noon, the window when V-2 launches from Holland typically occurred, but most held full-time employment, factory shifts, essential services, civil defence duties. They operated the mirror network on top of existing responsibilities, sacrificing sleep, health, family time. Arthur himself maintained his milk delivery route from 3:30 a.m. to 6:30 a.m., then supervised mirror operations until 2:00 p.m., then spent evenings recruiting volunteers and calculating new mirror positions. He averaged 4 hours of sleep per night. His wife, Margaret, working 12-hour shifts at a munitions factory in Woolwich, supported the effort, whilst simultaneously worrying that exhaustion would kill her husband before any rocket could. The bureaucratic resistance intensified proportionally to the network's success. Pemberton, the ARP coordinator who had initially dismissed the mirrors as unauthorized, now saw them as threat to his authority. He issued formal complaints to higher authorities, arguing that unregulated civilian initiatives undermine proper civil defense command structures and create confusion during emergency response. He demanded dismantling of all mirrors pending official review that could take months. Arthur confronted Pemberton at Stepney Town Hall on 29th January. The exchange, witnessed by multiple ARP volunteers, crystallized the fundamental conflict between rigid hierarchy and desperate innovation. "Your mirror system violates established protocols," Pemberton insisted, shuffling papers that somehow seemed more important than lives. "Civil defense operates through coordinated command chains, not individual initiatives." "Your coordinated command chains don't stop V-2s," Arthur replied, voice level, but eyes blazing. "Our mirrors do. We've spotted 3 rockets in 4 days. How many has your proper protocol saved? You're a milkman playing at military strategy. Leave defense to qualified personnel." Qualified personnel told us the Blitz would break London. We're still here. Perhaps qualification isn't what you think it means. The argument ended without resolution, but Pemberton's complaints continued flowing upward through bureaucratic channels, threatening to strangle the network in red tape whilst rockets continued falling. Environmental challenges compounded organizational friction. On 2nd February, heavy fog blanketed London, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards. The mirror network became effectively blind, unable to see the sky, much less reflections of descending rockets. Volunteers maintained their posts anyway, staring at grey opacity because abandoning watch felt like surrendering to helplessness. The psychological toll of useful vigilance, transforming into futile gesture, eroded morale. Then came 3rd February, when the network simultaneously proved its value and revealed its terrifying limitations. At 8:17 a.m., 3 observers spotted reflections almost simultaneously, but from different directions. Multiple rockets inbound within minutes of each other. A coordinated saturation attack designed to overwhelm response capacity. Arthur's system could spot them, yes, but coordinating warnings across dispersed impact zones using church bells and runners exceeded the network's communication infrastructure. Mrs. Fletcher rang St. Dunstan's bell while simultaneously dispatching her teenage son with bicycle and whistle to warn streets beyond bell range. Tom Wickham at the Crown and Anchor shouted warnings while sprinting toward potential impact zone. Arthur himself grabbed fire brigade telephone at Bennett's Dairy, desperately trying to coordinate emergency services for impacts not yet occurred. 2 V-2s struck Stepney within 90 seconds. The third hit Whitechapel. Casualties were reduced. The warnings provided crucial seconds, but coordination failures meant some streets received no alert at all. 7 people died who might have survived with better communication. The volunteers gathered that evening in St. Dunstan's basement, exhausted and devastated, questioning whether their improvised system was sufficient against the scale of threat they faced. Arthur addressed them, standing beside a map covered with mirror positions, his voice hoarse from shouting warnings all day. 7 dead instead of 70. We didn't save everyone, but we saved 63 people who would be corpses without us. Tomorrow, we refine communication. We establish relay protocols. We expand coverage. Because the alternative is accepting that Londoners die hearing nothing before the end. And I will not accept that. Will you? The volunteers, hollow-eyed and frostbitten and operating beyond exhaustion, nodded. They would continue. Because abandoning the effort meant abandoning neighbours to helplessness, and helplessness was not the British way. By 5th of February, the network had expanded to 27 mirrors, covering 5 square miles. Communication protocols now included designated runners with bicycles, backup bell ringers, and a jerry-rigged telephone tree using civil defence lines. The system remained fragile, held together by improvisation and determination, but it functioned. On 6th of February, at 6:52 a.m., Dorothy Fletcher spotted the flash that would transform everything. She rang the warning, initiated communication protocols, and watched through her mirror as reflection revealed not one rocket but the distinctive trail of a V-2 descending almost vertically toward the Thames docks. The 18-second warning allowed dock workers to dive into concrete shelters. The rocket struck an empty warehouse. 0 casualties. Arthur's Barmy mirror system had just prevented what would have been a massacre. The War Office could dismiss it. Pemberton could file complaints. But the volunteers knew with absolute certainty that they had created something extraordinary from scraps and stubbornness. The question was no longer whether the system worked. The question was whether they could sustain it long enough to prove it to people who made decisions from offices that had never heard incoming death. The waiting continued. The watching continued. And with each dawn, volunteers climbed to frozen rooftops, positioned themselves before angled glass, and scanned reflected sky for the flash that meant someone, somewhere, might live to see another sunrise. By mid-February 1945, German military intelligence was confronting anomalies in V-2 strike reports that violated every assumption about London's defensive capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Ernst Steinhoff, technical coordinator for the V-2 program at Peenemünde, reviewed impact assessments with growing confusion. The weapon's fundamental advantage, supersonic arrival before warning, should have produced consistent casualty patterns. Instead, recent strikes showed inexplicable variations. 3 rockets targeting East London docks between 8 to 14 February. Expected casualties 200 plus, actual casualties 17 total. 4 rockets striking residential Stepney. Expected devastation of occupied buildings. Actual pattern showing residents had somehow evacuated to interior rooms seconds before impact. Statistical analysis revealed impossible correlation. Casualties in specific East London districts had dropped 73% compared to strikes in other areas, despite identical weapon deployment and equivalent target density. Steinhoff's analysts proposed conventional explanations, perhaps improved shelter discipline, perhaps coincidental evacuation patterns, perhaps exaggerated casualty reports designed to maintain civilian morale. But the data resisted conventional interpretation. The casualty reduction was geographically specific, concentrated in precisely 3 square miles of Stepney, Bethnal Green, and Whitechapel. Something in those districts was providing advance warning where none should exist. German reconnaissance flights attempted photographic investigation, but found nothing unusual. No new radar installations, no suspicious antenna arrays, no evidence of detection equipment. The Luftwaffe's intelligence assessment, dated 16th of February, concluded no technological explanation identified for reduced V-2 effectiveness in target grid reference TQ338815, anomaly possibly attributable to improved civilian response protocols or statistical variance. What German analysts failed to comprehend, and what institutional rigidity prevented them from imagining, was that London's defence innovation had emerged not from technological sophistication, but from deliberate simplicity. The mirror network operated on principles so fundamental, light reflection, human observation, community communication, that it existed entirely outside the conceptual framework of modern warfare. Steinhoff's team searched for radar signatures and radio intercepts, whilst the actual system consisted of scavenged glass and exhausted volunteers. The German military mind, shaped by doctrinal emphasis on technical superiority and systematic methodology, could not conceive that improvised civilian initiative might outperform engineered weapons systems. The V-2 represented precision engineering, liquid-fueled rockets designed by Germany's finest scientists, manufactured in underground facilities, launched with mathematical accuracy. The notion that such technical achievement could be countered by angled mirrors arranged by a milkman was intellectually unacceptable. Major Wilhelm Dornberger, military commander of the V-2 program, dismissed the casualty reductions as meaningless statistical noise during a conference at Peenemünde on 19th of February. The V-2 travels at 1 mile per second. No warning system can operate faster than physics. These variance reports reflect poor intelligence gathering, not defensive capability. Continue standard targeting protocols. That institutional blindness created strategic vulnerability the Germans never recognized. Whilst Dornberger insisted effectiveness remained unchanged, Arthur Bennett's network expanded to 43 mirrors, covering 9 square miles. Whilst German analysts searched for technological explanations, volunteers refined communication protocols that reduced warning distribution time from 18 seconds to 11 seconds. Whilst the V-2 program continued confident in its invulnerability, East London was developing defence in depth that neutralised supersonic advantage through systematic observation and community coordination. The first direct engagement, where the mirror network's effectiveness became undeniable, occurred on 23rd February at 7:41 a.m. German launch crews at The Hague deployed a 6-rocket saturation strike targeting London's financial district, designed to create maximum disruption with overlapping impact times. Standard tactical doctrine. Multiple simultaneous strikes overwhelm civil defense response, maximize casualties, create terror through inescapable destruction. Arthur's network spotted all 6 rockets during their descent. The distributed mirror coverage meant multiple observers detected multiple reflections almost simultaneously. Communication protocols activated across the entire network within seconds. Church bells rang from St. Dunstan's to Christchurch Spitalfields. Runners on bicycles sprinted through streets shouting warnings. ARP wardens repeated alerts through megaphones. Factory sirens joined the cacophony. For approximately 40 seconds, East London transformed into coordinated defensive organism. Civilians who had internalized response protocols over weeks of practice executed immediate actions. Interior rooms, load-bearing walls, covering vulnerable family members. Seconds of protection against weapons designed to permit none. The 6 V-2s struck across 3 minutes. Impact locations varied, but casualty patterns remained consistent. Minimal deaths, reduced injuries, structural damage without human cost, proportional to explosive force. Total casualties across 6 strikes. 11 dead, 43 injured. Expected casualties for equivalent strikes in undefended areas, 185 dead, 400 plus injured. Post-strike analysis by German intelligence showed deepening confusion. 6 rockets, verified impacts, explosive yields within expected parameters, yet casualty effectiveness reduced to approximately 6% of projections. The pattern was no longer statistical noise. Something in East London was systematically degrading the V-2's primary weapon characteristic. Its capacity to kill before warning permitted survival response. Steinhoff reviewed intercept reports, desperately searching for explanation. His analysts examined radio traffic, monitored phone lines, searched for any evidence of detection technology. They found nothing because they were searching in wrong conceptual space entirely. The mirror network operated without electronics, without radio, without anything German doctrine recognized as military infrastructure. It was invisible to technical reconnaissance because it wasn't technical, it was human. A captured RAF navigator, interrogated about London's defences, mentioned hearing about some Barmy mirror system run by civilians in East London. Eisen, the German interrogator, dismissed it as confused rumour, noting in his report, "Prisoner claims civilians using mirrors for rocket detection, obviously trauma-induced fantasy or deliberate misinformation, no further intelligence value." That dismissal encapsulated the fundamental German failure. Inability to accept that meaningful defensive innovation could emerge from sources outside professional military structures. The Wehrmacht respected British engineering, acknowledged RAF tactical sophistication, studied Royal Navy strategic thinking, but the concept that a Milkman and volunteers could create effective countermeasure to Germany's most advanced weapon contradicted everything doctrine taught about warfare's hierarchical nature. By month's end, the Mirror network had spotted 41 V-2 rockets in 8 days of peak operation, with verified warnings distributed for 37 of them. Casualty rates in covered districts remained 70+% below citywide averages. The system wasn't perfect. 4 rockets went undetected due to cloud cover, communication failures cost lives in several incidents, and the geographical limitation meant much of London remained vulnerable. But within its operational area, Arthur Bennett's improvised network had achieved what Britain's entire scientific establishment deemed impossible, providing advance warning against weapons traveling faster than sound. The Germans never understood what defeated them. Their final intelligence assessment, dated 3rd March, attributed casualty reductions to improved shelter construction, population dispersal, or exaggerated initial casualty estimates. Dornberger continued confident. The V-2 remained unstoppable. Steinhoff's analysts continued searching for radar installations that didn't exist. Meanwhile, on frozen London rooftops, exhausted volunteers continued staring at angled mirrors, watching reflected sky, saving lives through attention and community coordination. They had won engagement the enemy never knew existed, employing weapons doctrine refused to recognize, proving that sometimes the most effective countermeasure isn't technological sophistication, but human ingenuity, applied with desperate determination. The war would end in weeks. The V-2 campaign would cease. But the lesson would endure. Systems designed by experts can be defeated by citizens who refuse to accept helplessness, who improvise when institutions fail, who understand that survival sometimes demands ignoring what professionals insist is impossible. When Germany surrendered on 8th May 1945, the V-2 campaign ended with abrupt finality. No more dawn vigils scanning reflected sky. No more church bells clanging desperate warnings. No more rockets screaming faster than sound towards streets where children played. The volunteers, who had maintained Arthur Bennett's mirror network, experienced peculiar disorientation. Exhausted relief mixed with unsettling purposelessness. Like marathon runners crossing finish line they hadn't seen approaching, final accounting revealed scope of achievement that had seemed impossible 12 weeks earlier. Between 26th January and 27th March 1945, the Mirror Network provided advance warning for 163 V-2 strikes within its operational coverage area. Casualty analysis conducted by Civil Defense Headquarters compared deaths in covered districts versus undefended areas. Covered zones showed 74% casualty reduction. The raw mathematics translated to human terms. Approximately 453 lives saved through improvised optical detection and community response protocols. Arthur Bennett never claimed heroism. When approached by newspaper reporters in June 1945, he deflected credit with characteristic East London understatement. "We just watched the sky and rang bells when we saw something nasty coming. Any milkman could have done it." But the volunteers understood. The truth was more complex than modesty acknowledged. Arthur had imagined possibility when professionals insisted impossibility, calculated angles when experts dismissed calculation, organized civilians when institutions offered only bureaucratic paralysis. He had refused to accept that Londoners must die helpless, and that refusal had saved hundreds. The War Office's response revealed institutional discomfort, with narrative contradicting established hierarchies. A classified memorandum dated 15th June 1945 acknowledged the Mirror Network's unexpected operational effectiveness, whilst simultaneously noting that such improvised civilian initiatives, whilst commendable during emergency circumstances, should not establish precedent for bypassing proper civil defense coordination structures. Translation: well done, but please don't do that again without permission. Pemberton, the ARP coordinator who had tried to shut down the mirrors, submitted reports attempting to claim credit for permitting experimental civil defense innovation despite regulatory concerns. The volunteers who remembered his obstruction found grim humor in bureaucratic revisionism. Dorothy Fletcher observed dryly, "Funny how people who called us Barmy suddenly remember supporting us once we saved 400 lives." The mirrors themselves came down within weeks of war's end. Mirrors returned to households, to shops rebuilding after bombardment, to dressing tables and chemist displays. Rooftops that had served as observation posts reverted to ordinary rooftops. St. Dunstan's bell rang for weddings instead of warnings. The physical infrastructure of detection vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving only memory and statistical anomalies in civil defense records. For volunteers, the transition to peace was complicated. Some experienced profound relief, grateful to resume ordinary lives after months of exhausting vigilance. Others struggled with abrupt cessation of purposeful urgency. Tom Wickham, the dock worker who had maintained observation posts through frostbite and exhaustion, found peacetime work felt meaningless compared to watching reflected sky for death's approach. Mrs. Fletcher continued reflexively scanning rooflines for mirrors that no longer existed, habits of survival outlasting survival's necessity. Arthur resumed his milk delivery route full-time, rising at 3 a.m. to deliver bottles through streets, slowly rebuilding. Neighbors who knew his role during the V-2 campaign treated him with quiet respect that embarrassed him. He was uncomfortable with individual recognition, insisting the network's success reflected collective effort, volunteers who sacrificed sleep and safety, families who supported exhausted partners, community members who trusted improvised warning system when official channels offered nothing. The broader historical impact remained unrecognized for decades. Military historians focused on conventional defense systems, radar networks, fighter interception, anti-aircraft artillery. Academic analyses examined the V-2 campaign primarily through lens of technological development and strategic targeting. The Mirror network, having operated outside official channels and left minimal documentary record, existed as footnote in specialized civil defense archives. Rediscovery began in 1983 when historian Dr. Sarah Morrison, researching civilian experience during V-2 strikes, encountered parish records from St. Dunstan's Church mentioning mirror observation posts coordinated by local volunteers. Initial assumption was documentation error. Surely mirrors couldn't detect supersonic rockets. But cross-referencing civil defense casualty statistics with geographic data revealed the same anomaly German intelligence had noticed 40 years earlier. Drastically reduced casualties in specific East London districts during specific time frame. Morrison interviewed surviving volunteers, now elderly, who had maintained Arthur's network. Their testimonies, recorded on tape in Morrison's university office, revealed systematic operation dismissed by official history. Dorothy Fletcher, then 78 and still sharp-minded, described watching reflected sky with such vivid detail that Morrison initially questioned whether memory had embellished experience. But when Fletcher's account correlated exactly with civil defense incident logs, casualty records, and even weather reports from 1945, the evidence became undeniable. Arthur Bennett had died in 1974, never having spoken publicly about the Mirror network beyond immediate community. His obituary in the Stepney Gazette mentioned his wartime civil defense work in single sentence, noting he contributed to local ARP efforts during V-2 attacks. Road. The profound understatement typified the man who had innovated defensive systems saving hundreds, whilst insisting he was just a milkman doing what needed doing. Morrison's subsequent academic paper, Civilian Innovation in V-2 Defense, the Stepney Mirror Network 1945, transformed understanding of how improvised initiative could supplement or even exceed institutional capability during crisis. The research documented not merely operational success, but methodological insight that observers positioned to detect light reflection could provide earlier warning than radar systems tracking ballistic trajectory, that community communication networks could distribute alerts faster than centralized command structures, that civilians equipped with basic tools and desperate motivation could innovate solutions professionals deemed impossible. In 1995, the 50th anniversary of VE Day, the Borough of Tower Hamlets installed commemorative plaque on St. Dunstan's Church. From this tower, volunteers coordinated mirror-based early warning system that saved hundreds of lives during V-2 attacks, January-March 1945. Their improvised ingenuity exemplified the determination of ordinary Londoners confronting extraordinary threat. The three surviving volunteers, Dorothy Fletcher, Tom Wickham's daughter Mary, and James Caldwell, the Reverend's grandson who had served as teenage runner, attended the dedication ceremony. When asked to speak, Dorothy Fletcher offered observation that captured the network's essential spirit. "We weren't heroes, We were terrified people who refused to die helpless. Arthur gave us mirrors and mathematics and permission to be usefully Barmy. That's all we needed. B. The mirror network's legacy extended beyond immediate lives, saved into broader understanding of resilience's mechanics. It demonstrated that effective defense need not depend exclusively on technical sophistication, that improvisation guided by intimate local knowledge sometimes outperforms centralized planning, that civilians facing existential threat possess capacity for innovation exceeding institutional expectations. It proved that ordinary people, milkmen, shop assistants, dock workers, housewives, can achieve extraordinary outcomes when necessity, opportunity, and refusal to accept helplessness converge. Modern military analysts studying asymmetric defense occasionally reference the Stepney mirrors as example of low-tech countermeasures neutralizing high-tech weapons through unconventional methodology. The broader lesson resonates beyond military context, that communities confronting seemingly insurmountable challenges sometimes discover solutions precisely because they lack expertise, telling them solutions are impossible. The story concludes not with triumph but with quiet validation, recognition that Arthur Bennett's Barmy idea saved hundreds of lives through systematic application of simple principles. Light travels faster than sound, observation precedes action, community coordination multiplies individual capacity. In January 1945, those principles seemed inadequate against Germany's most advanced weapon. By March 1945, they had proven sufficient. 453 people survived to see peace because a milkman refused to accept that death must arrive without warning, because volunteers sacrificed exhaustion watching reflected sky, because community chose possibility over resignation. That stubborn determination to improvise survival, despite institutional dismissal, exemplified something fundamental about British character during crisis. The conviction that proper response to being told something is impossible isn't acceptance, but immediate effort to prove otherwise. The mirrors are gone. The volunteers are gone. Arthur Bennett's milk delivery route no longer exists in London, rebuilt beyond recognition. But the lesson endures, that ordinary individuals confronting extraordinary threat possess capacity for innovation exceeding their credentials, that simple tools applied with intelligence can defeat sophisticated systems applied with arrogance, that sometimes the most effective weapon against unstoppable force is refusal to believe it cannot be stopped. In the end, 41 rockets spotted in 8 days was not the miracle. The miracle was that anyone believed stopping them was possible in the first place. If this story of British ingenuity and determination resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel for more untold accounts of ordinary people achieving extraordinary things during the war. What other overlooked innovations do you think changed history? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone, and your insights often inspire our next story. Ring that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover another remarkable chapter of resilience that deserves to be remembered. Thank you for watching.